back to a term I guarantee you had in ninth grade biology. With any luck, you have not thought about this word since then. Do you remember homeostasis? Homeostasis, having an ideal body temperature, an ideal level of glucose in the bloodstream, having an ideal everything, being in homeostatic balance. A stressor is anything in the outside world that knocks you out of homeostatic balance. You're some zebra and a lion has leapt out and ripped your stomach open and your innards are dragging in the dust and you still need to get out of there. This counts as being out of homeostatic balance. Or you're that lion who's half starved to death, and if you don't manage to chase something down to eat, you're not going to survive the night, a short-term physical crisis. And the stress response is what you do with your body. You secrete adrenaline and 11D other hormones I won't torture you with. The stress response reestablishes homeostatic balance. That's all you need to know about the subject if you're a zebra or a lion. If you're human, though, you've got to expand the definition in a very critical way, which is, among us, some of the time we turn on the stress response because we've had a challenge to homeostatic balance, all of that sort of thing. But some of the time we turn on the stress response because we think we're just about to be stressed. And if it turns out that you're right, hooray for you. You know, here comes the elephant. You don't have to wait to be stomped by it before increasing your blood pressure. You can have an anticipatory stress response, which is great. On the other hand, if you think that way all the time and you're constantly assuming that there are stressors coming that do not really exist, we have technical terms for you. You're being neurotic as hell. You're being anxious, you're being paranoid, you're being hostile, you are being profoundly human. Sit down a hippo and try to describe what the prime lending rate is, and it's going to have no idea what you're talking about. But we do. And that's the central concept in the whole field. We cognitively, socially sophisticated primates turn on the exact same stress response as does that zebra running for its life or a lion running for a meal, and we turn it on for purely psychological reasons. We turn it on with memories, with emotions, with thoughts, and the whole punchline is that's not what it evolved for. What stress is like for 99% of the beasts on this planet is 3 minutes of screaming terror in the savannah, after which it's either over with or you're over with. And what do? We turn on the identical stress response for 30-year mortgages. And that's where you begin to get the wear and tear in the system.
Hey everybody, as you can tell, I am not at my setup down in Atlanta anymore. I am currently in upstate New York. I want to talk to you about an analogy which has come up a couple of times in the conversations that I've had with some philosophers, and it has to do with the relationship between the mind and the external world. This is a theme that keeps coming up in my work. I think it's critically important when talking about metaphysics, about what types of things exist in the world, that we're very precise in understanding the relationship between the mind and language and external reality. Like all good philosophic analogies, this one takes place in a cave. But it's not Plato's allegory of the cave. This is kind of my own example. Imagine that you find yourself in a pitch black cave. You can't see anything. And you have in your hand a flashlight. When you turn the flashlight on, you can see the walls of the cave around you. When you turn the flashlight off, you can't see anything. It's pitch black. So the question is this. When you turn the flashlight on, are you illuminating the walls of the cave that are already there? Or is the flashlight creating the walls of the cave around you? Intuitively, you might say, well, of course, the flashlight is illuminating what's already there. But what if somebody were to be skeptical and say, no, how do you know that you're merely illuminating the walls of the cave and not just creating them? What evidence do you have? Well, you'd say, well, every time I've turned on the flashlight, the walls of the cave are there. And somebody could say, well, that is equally as plausible evidence for saying that every time you turn on the flashlight, you're creating the walls of the cave. And it's kind of a tricky issue here. The analogy is the flashlight is the mind, is consciousness, you might call it. And the walls of the cave are the external world. And the question is, does the mind create reality, Or is the mind, are you simply aware of what's already there? Now, if you think this question is silly, you think, well, of course, the mind is just aware of what's already there, or the flashlight is simply illuminating what's already there. I challenge you to really dive into trying to justify your premises. What evidence do you have that the external world is out there, separate of your experience of it, separate of your awareness of it? What kind of experiences can you draw from which lead you towards that conclusion? Now, I won't pretend to justify all the different perspectives on this topic. Let me just give you my own personal resolution, which you might find compelling, maybe not. I do think that the mind illuminates what's already there. I think that the flashlight illuminates the walls on the cave, that even if the flashlight's broken and you can't turn the light on, the walls of the cave exist, and even if you don't have awareness of the external world, this external world still exists, separate of our conception, separate of our experience of it. But if somebody were to ask me, Steve, how do you know? I would say, I don't. I don't think that this is something you can have certainty about. I think it's overwhelmingly plausible and reasonable, for reasons maybe I'll talk a bit more in detail in the future. But I don't think we can know whether or not the mind creates reality ultimately. And where I would say the skeptical or the non-intuitive answer has a lot of merit is to say that the mind kind of structures reality. It might not create reality, but as far as our own internal experience goes, I think we live really in a world of conception. I talked a little bit about this in the video on metaphysics of whether or not chairs exist, for example. That when we want to be very precise, when we think we're navigating a world of physical objects, I think the mind is actually navigating in a world of concepts. It doesn't mean we have to be very clear. It doesn't mean that we're creating objects out of thin air. It means that ultimately the way that the mind carves up information that's coming at us in the world is fundamentally mental. So you might be able to say chairs wouldn't exist without the mind, which is very different than saying the bits of matter which constitute the chair wouldn't exist without a mind. So the next couple of weeks are going to be pretty crazy because I got the new book coming out, I got the new podcast coming out, the new website coming out, and my wife and I are getting ready to set sail for the world journey where I get to interview all of these intellectuals from around the globe about really big ideas. And lastly, I want to give 2 more shout outs to some new Patreon supporters, Michael Sedlak and the Georgia Freeman. Thank you both very much for supporting the work that I'm doing and supporting the creation of a rational worldview. The last couple months have been really awesome because we've been picking up some more Patreon supporters who all value rationalism. So I couldn't be more enthusiastic, and thanks everybody for your support, and stay tuned.